In the dim bowels of Chest Castle, where the air hung heavy with the chill of stone and the faint metallic tang of despair, a young girl stirred in her chains. Her name was Anna, a simple peasant from a nearby village, lured by promises of steady work and a noble's favour. The iron links bit into her wrists, raw from days of confinement, and her breath came in shallow gasps as footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow, deliberate, like the approach of fate itself. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a candle flame. Could this be rescue? A guard, perhaps, or some kind soul from the household staff, come to murmur of freedom? The door creaked open on rusted hinges, admitting a sliver of torchlight that danced across the damp walls, casting elongated silhouettes that seemed to writhe like living things. Anna lifted her head, her eyes widening as a figure emerged from the gloom. It was a woman, elegant beyond measure, her gown of rich silk whispering against the flagstones, embroidered with threads that caught the light like veins of gold. Her hair was piled high, adorned with jewels that sparkled coldly, and her face, oh, her face, was a mask of refined beauty, pale skin smooth as porcelain, lips curved in what might have been a smile of compassion. Anna's heart leapt. This must be the lady of the castle herself, the Countess Báthory, descending into this pit of misery to right some terrible mistake. Noblewomen were protectors, weren't they? Symbols of grace in a world of hardship. "My lady," Anna murmured, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear, "please, I've done nothing wrong. They said I was to serve, but then the chains. Help me, I beg you." The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful, unhurried, like a predator savoring the moment before the strike. The torchlight illuminated her eyes now, dark, unblinking, holding not pity, but something deeper, hungrier. She tilted her head, regarding Anna as one might a curious specimen under glass. "Oh, my dear," she intoned, her voice soft as velvet, laced with an undercurrent of amusement, "thou hast been chosen for something far greater than service, something eternal." Her hand extended, fingers adorned with rings that gleamed like tiny blades, brushing Anna's cheek with a touch that sent ice through her veins. Realization crashed over Anna like a wave, drowning the hope in terror. This was no savior. This noblewoman, this embodiment of wealth and power, was the architect of the nightmare, the one whose commands had forged the chains, whose veiled orders had summoned the guards. As the Countess's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the flickering light, Anna's scream tore through the dungeon, resounding off the walls, only to be swallowed by the unyielding stone. But in that castle of secrets, screams were as common as the wind through the battlements, and they faded into silence, leaving only the promise of horrors yet to unfold. This was no isolated nightmare, no fevered dream of a frightened girl. This was the world of Elizabeth Báthory, one of the deadliest serial killers in history, not a lurking fiend from the fringes of poverty, but a noblewoman draped in luxury, her hands stained not just with ink from ledgers of wealth, but with the blood of the innocent. Hundreds, Perhaps over 600 young women and girls may have crossed her threshold, drawn by the allure of service in a grand estate, only to vanish into oblivion. Their fates were spoken of in hushed tremors among the villagers, tales of punishment for trifles that escalated into unspeakable agony, of crimson spilled not in rage alone, but in pursuit of eternal youth and beauty. But was she truly the monster history paints her as? A vampire in human form, bathing in scarlet to defy time? Or has legend amplified her cruelties, weaving a myth from the threads of real evil to warn us all? This is the story of the Blood Countess, a tale where nobility's mask slips to reveal the grotesque face beneath. Remember, as we delve into the veils, evil often smiles behind silk and jewels, its true nature hidden until crimson betrays it. Elizabeth Báthory entered the world on August 7th, 1560, not in some humble cottage amid the rolling hills of Hungary, but within the fortified walls of near Bátor, a stronghold befitting one of Central Europe's most illustrious families. The Báthory clan was no ordinary nobility, their bloodline intertwined with royalty across the continent, boasting uncles who wore crowns and aunts who influenced courts from Poland to Transylvania. Her father, György Báthory, was a voivode, a military governor whose iron fist quelled uprisings and expanded territories, while her mother, Anna, came from the Somlyo branch, equally steeped in power and intrigue. This was the Protestant elite of the Kingdom of Hungary, a realm fractured by the ceaseless Ottoman invasions from the south and the Habsburg ambitions from the west. In such a time, nobility meant not just wealth and land, vast estates that stretched across the Carpathian Mountains, encompassing villages where peasants toiled like ants under the sun, but absolute authority over life and death. From her earliest breaths, Elizabeth was immersed in a world where brutality was not an aberration but a tool of governance. The feudal order of 16th century Hungary was a tapestry woven with threads of violence. Public executions served as spectacles to deter the unruly. Floggings and brandings were meted out for minor infractions, and the nobility viewed their serfs as little more than chattel, disposable in the grand game of power. Echoes from historians suggest that Elizabeth's own family harbored darker secrets. Relatives accused of incest, murder, and even alchemy-tinged rituals that blurred the line between science and sorcery. One uncle, Stefan Báthory, would become King of Poland, his reign marked by ruthless campaigns against enemies both foreign and domestic. Another kin, Gábor Báthory, later Prince of Transylvania, was notorious for his sadistic excesses, including the torture of rivals. In this lineage, crimson spilled was not a stain, but a reinforcement of dominance, a lesson etched into young Elizabeth's mind like the carvings on the family crest. Yet beneath the veneer of privilege, gloom lurked in her personal realm. Accounts from the era, preserved in fragmented letters and court records, hint at epilepsy plaguing her youth. a condition that twisted her perceptions, sending her into fits where reality fractured like shattered glass. Imagine a child, quick-witted and versed in multiple languages by adolescence, suddenly seized by convulsions, her body arching in agony as visions danced before her eyes. Was it divine punishment, as some superstitious servants muttered, or a harbinger of the madness that would later consume her? Her tutors praised her intellect, her mastery of Latin, German, and Greek, her logical mind that dissected arguments with surgical precision. But in a world where medicine mingled with folklore, such afflictions were often seen as omens, planting seeds of isolation and perhaps a fascination with the body's vulnerabilities. One cannot help but wonder, did these seizures warp her empathy, turning pain into a familiar companion rather than a horror to avoid? Or was it the soil of nobility's unchecked power that nourished the darker impulses within? To understand the woman she became, we must peer into a pivotal moment from her childhood, a scene that history has preserved like a macabre painting, illuminating the brutality that shaped her. Picture this. It is 1567, and 7-year-old Elizabeth stands in the sun-drenched courtyard of the family estate at Echelons, the air thick with the buzz of flies and the murmurs of a gathered crowd. Peasants huddle at the edges, their faces etched with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, while nobles and servants form a tighter circle around the spectacle. A horse thief, a wiring man with dirt-caked skin and desperate eyes, lies bound to a wooden post, his pleas for mercy cutting through the tension like a knife. "I only took what I needed to feed my family," he cries, his voice breaking as soldiers drag him forward. Young Elizabeth, small and wide-eyed in her embroidered dress, clutches her nurse's hand, but her gaze is fixed, unblinking. The punishment, decreed by her family as a lesson in justice, unfolds with ritualistic precision. A soldier, his uniform stained from prior duties, draws a blade, sharp and glinting under the midday sun, and slices open the thief's belly in one swift motion. Blood wells up, dark and viscous, pooling on the dusty ground as the man screams, a raw animal sound that resounds off the stone walls. But the horror does not end there. With grim efficiency, the soldier forces chunks of the thief's own raw flesh into his gaping mouth, stuffing it down as the victim chokes and writhes. The crowd watches in silence, some crossing themselves, others nodding in approval. This is the order of things, a deterrent against chaos. Young Elizabeth does not flinch. Her tutors, standing nearby, murmur of discipline's necessity, of how power must be asserted to maintain the divine hierarchy. Her family members exchange glances, seeing in her composure a sign of strength, a Báthory through and through. But what stirs within her? Horror, certainly, for she is but a child, yet as the thief's gasps fade into gurgling silence, and his body slumps lifeless, her eyes linger on the crimson stains spreading across the earth. Is it revulsion that quickens her pulse, or the first flicker of fascination, the realization that life can be unraveled so easily, that scarlet holds a power all its own? This moment, seared into her psyche, plants a seed, watered by the violence of her world, incubated in the absolute impunity of her station. Epilepsy's distortions may have blurred the lines further, turning observed agony into something almost intimate. As Elizabeth grew, her education refined her intellect, but did little to temper the emerging gloom. By her early teens, she was a polyglot, debating philosophy and strategy with scholars who marveled at her acuity. Yet the curriculum of nobility included harsher lessons: how to manage estates, command servants, and dispense justice without remorse. In Hungary's turbulent landscape, where Ottoman raiders scorched border villages and Habsburg agents schemed in hidden halls, survival demanded ruthlessness. Protestantism, her family's faith amid Catholic dominance, added layers of intrigue, alliances forged in secret, enemies purged with zeal. Friends and kin noted her beauty, her porcelain skin and raven hair, but also a discontent that simmered beneath, a vanity that whispered of time's inexorable theft. Mirrors became her confidence, reflecting not just her form, but her fears of fading allure in a society that valued women as ornaments and breeders. At 15, in 1575, Elizabeth's world shifted once more with her marriage to Ferenc Nadasdy, a union arranged to consolidate power and wealth. He was 20, a rising star among Hungarian's warriors, known as the Black Knight for his fearsome campaigns against the Ottoman Turks. Tall, armored in blackened plate that struck terror on the battlefield, Ferenc was a man forged in crimson. His tactics included impaling enemies and leaving their corpses as warnings along the frontiers. Their wedding at Varad was a spectacle of opulence, with feasts that lasted days and gifts from across Europe, but beneath the revelry lay a darker synergy. Ferenc's cruelty matched Elizabeth's budding impulses. Letters between them, later discovered, revealed shared discussions of discipline for disobedient servants, his war stories inspiring her domestic tyrannies. Together they resided at estates like Sarvar and Chete, vast fortresses where towers pierced the sky and dungeons lay hidden below. Ferenc's frequent absences on the front lines left Elizabeth in command, her authority absolute over hundreds of serfs and staff. Trusted confidants, women like Ilona Jo and Dorotea Sentes, who would later become her infamous accomplices, entered her circle, indulging whims that grew ever more severe. Early murmurs of trouble emerged, a maid vanishing after a spilled goblet, another returning to her village with scars crisscrossing her back like a map of pain. Punishments escalated, from verbal rebukes to whips that drew crimson, and finally to mutilations that left bodies broken. But why? What Alchemy transformed an educated noblewoman into a harbinger of torment. The psychological threads weave a complex tapestry. Control, perhaps, an aristocrat's assertion of dominance over those who dare displease, masking insecurities born from a volatile world, much like modern narcissists who wield power to feed fragile egos, deriving validation from others' subjugation. Vanity lurked too, friends noting her obsession with youth as lines began to etch her skin. Or was it pleasure, a sadistic thrill in stripping away innocence layer by layer until only vulnerability remained? Consider a scene from these years, drawn from later testimonies. In a dimly lit chamber at Sarvar, Elizabeth oversees a correction. A young servant, accused of sloppy needlework, kneels trembling on the cold floor. The Countess circles her slowly, her gown trailing like a serpent's tail. "Dost thou deem thyself fit to handle my linens?" she intones, her voice low and measured, devoid of warmth. The girl whimpers. "Forgive me, my lady, it was a mistake." With a nod, Elizabeth signals her handmaids. They pin the girl down, her cries muffled as a whip cracks through the air, lashing skin until red welts bloom. But it does not stop there. Tools are brought, pincers, heated irons, applied with precision that speaks of experimentation. The scent of seared flesh rises, mingling with the girl's sobs, and Elizabeth watches, her expression inscrutable. Satisfaction, or merely the exercise of power? Witnesses would recall such incidents multiplying: corpses found in ditches, girls with missing fingers or branded arms fleeing back to villages. Yet no one acted. The Báthory name was a shield, her influence a web that ensnared officials and silenced complaints. Peasants barred their doors at dusk, whispering prayers to saints for protection, while noble neighbors dined at her table, oblivious or willfully blind to the stains just beyond the chamber doors. Irony cloaks this era. The same walls that exalted her status concealed her descent, and society's silence did not merely permit evil, it beckoned it, inviting the monster to flourish unchecked. Pause here and reflect. How many murmurs must accumulate before they coalesce into screams? If this tale of veils and crimson sends chills racing down your spine, like the video if you're gripped, and subscribe for more journeys into history's darkest corners. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was the seed of her cruelty planted in childhood, or was it always there, waiting for the right soil? But as Ferran's wars raged on, fate would shift once more. His death would unleash the storm fully, transforming isolated cruelties into a cascade of nightmares that even nobility could no longer ignore. What happened next would etch her name in scarlet forever. With the death of Ferenc Nadasti on January 4, 1604, the fragile leash on Elizabeth Báthory's darker impulses snapped like a brittle chain in the wind. He had perished not on the battlefield, where his Black Knight legend might have demanded a heroic end, but in the quiet grip of illness, rheumatic fever, some said, or perhaps the cumulative toll of wounds sustained in endless skirmishes against the Ottoman hordes. At 44, Ferenc left behind a widow of immense wealth, controlling 17 estates scattered across Hungary, Slovakia, and beyond, each a fortress of stone and secrets. But more than land, he bequeathed her freedom. No longer would his absences be temporary interludes. Now the reins of power were hers alone, unchecked by even the nominal oversight of a husband. Loneliness crept in like fog over the Carpathians, but it mingled with exhilaration. Elizabeth, now 43, found herself at the pinnacle of autonomy in a society that rarely afforded women such latitude. Her children, 3 daughters and a son, were grown or married off, their presence a distant echo in the vast halls of Chaite Castle. Into this void stepped her confidants, a cadre of loyal enablers whose devotion bordered on fanaticism. Chief among them was Anna Darvalia, a shadowy figure often described in testimonies as a witch-like temptress, her influence over Elizabeth murmured to be almost supernatural. Darvalia, with her knowledge of herbal poisons and folk remedies, became the architect of torments, her cruelty surpassing even her mistress's in ingenuity. Then there was Ilona Yo, the wet nurse turned torturer, whose maternal facade hid a sadistic core. Dorothea Sentesh, stout and unflinching, executing orders with mechanical precision, and others like Katerina Benitska, drawn into the web by promises of favor or fear of reprisal. Together they formed a sisterhood of horror, transforming the castle from a noble residence into a labyrinth of agony. What had been sporadic acts of punishment in Ferenc's lifetime now accelerated into a systematic campaign, a ritualistic descent, where cruelty was not merely reactive, but orchestrated, almost performative. Psychological echoes suggest this escalation stemmed from a perfect storm, the isolation of widowhood amplifying her insecurities, the absence of any restraining force allowing her sadism to bloom unchecked, and perhaps the lingering effects of her epilepsy, blurring the boundaries between delusion and desire. In an era when nobility could flog serfs without consequence, Elizabeth pushed the envelope further, her actions a grotesque exaggeration of the feudal norm, much like modern tyrants who cloak authoritarian control in grandeur, deriving twisted fulfillment from the subjugation of the vulnerable. Vanity, too, played its part. Contemporaries noted her growing obsession with mirrors, her creams and potions sourced from alchemists, as if defying age were a battle she could win through sheer will. But beneath it all lurked something primal, the thrill of absolute control, of holding life in her hands and squeezing until it shattered. To grasp the depth of this nightmare, envision a scene preserved in the chilling testimonies of survivors and accomplices, a glimpse into the candlelit chambers where horror unfolded like a dark liturgy. It is a winter evening in 1605, the first year of her unchecked reign, and snow blankets the hills outside Jete, muffling the world in white silence. Deep within the castle, in a chamber far from prying eyes, torches flicker against rough-hewn stone walls, their flames casting elongated silhouettes that dance like spectres. The air is thick with the scent of burning tallow and something sharper, fear, perhaps, or the faint precursor of scarlet. A young girl, no more than 16, kneels on the damp flagstones, her simple dress torn at the hem from the rough handling of her captors. She is Helena, a seamstress from a nearby village, accused of failing to sew lace with the precision demanded for the Countess's gowns. Her hands tremble, clasped in supplication, as footsteps approach from the corridor beyond. The door swings open, admitting Elizabeth Báthory herself, her presence commanding the room like a storm front. She is resplendent in a gown of deep crimson velvet, the color of wine or coagulating scarlet. Her hair coiled elegantly, her face a porcelain mask of composure. Behind her trailed Darvolya and Sentius, their expressions blank, tools of obedience. Helena's eyes widen, a flicker of desperate hope igniting. The door swings open, admitting Elizabeth Báthory herself, her presence commanding the room like a storm front. She is resplendent in a gown of deep crimson velvet, the color of wine or coagulating scarlet. Her hair coiled elegantly, her face a porcelain mask of composure. Behind her trailed Darvolya and Sentius, their expressions blank, tools of obedience. Helena's eyes widen, a flicker of desperate hope igniting. "My lady," she murmurs, her voice cracking. "It was but a small error. The thread slipped. I can mend it, I swear." Elizabeth pauses, her gaze sweeping over the girl with clinical detachment, as if appraising a flawed tapestry. She circles slowly, her slippers whispering against the stone, building the tension like a tightening noose. "Such imperfection demands atonement," she intones, her tone soft, almost maternal, yet devoid of warmth. With a subtle nod, she signals her handmaids. Sentius seizes Helena's arms, pinning them behind her back, while Darvolya retrieves a brazier from the corner, coals glowing red-hot within. Helena struggles, her pleas escalating into sobs. "Please, mercy, I'll do better, anything." But mercy is a foreign word in this sanctum. Elizabeth watches as Darvolya heats an iron poker in the flames, the metal shifting from black to orange, then white. The room fills with the acrid scent of scorching iron, mingling with Helena's terror sweat. When the tool is ready, Sentius forces the girl's head back, exposing her neck and shoulders. Elizabeth steps forward, her hand steady, as she presses the iron against flesh, not in blind rage, but with surgical calm. The sizzle of burning skin rises like unholy incense, Helena's scream piercing the air, raw and endless, resounding through the corridors where other servants huddle, pretending not to hear. As the girl's body convulses, Elizabeth's eyes reflect the flame's glow. Satisfaction gleaming there, or perhaps something colder, more analytical. She murmurs, almost to herself, "See how pain refines. It strips away the imperfect, leaving only purity." The torture prolongs, needles thrust beneath fingernails, whips cracking anew, each act prolonging the agony, as if to savor it. Finally, Helena slumps, broken but alive, for now. Elizabeth turns away, wiping her hands on a silken cloth, her composure unbroken. Is it anger that drives her, a reprisal for perceived slights, or satisfaction, a dark pleasure in the orchestration of suffering? Testimonies from the era could never fully decide, but one thing was clear. In that chamber, humanity dissolved, replaced by a ritual where power and pain intertwined. This was but one thread in a tapestry of terrors that unfolded over the years following Ferenc's death. The catalogue of horrors pieced together from the 1611 trial confessions and survivor accounts reads like a manual of medieval sadism, elevated to grotesque artistry. Girls, mostly between 12 and 18, drawn from peasant villages with promises of employment, were subjected to torments that escalated in ingenuity and duration. Needles were not merely pricked, but driven deep beneath nails and into sensitive flesh, left to fester as infections bloomed. Servants smeared in honey were staked outside, exposed to swarms of insects that feasted on their skin, their screams a symphony for the Countess's amusement. Starvation became a game. Victims locked in cells, denied food until delirium set in, then revived with meager scraps only to prolong the cycle, their bodies wasting away like autumn leaves. Flash forward to another vignette, drawn from Darvolya's own murmured admissions. In the castle's lower levels, the group of 3 girls huddles in a cage-like enclosure, their bodies bruised from prior beatings. Elizabeth enters, flanked by her accomplices, carrying a basin of freezing water, drawn from the winter streams outside. "Ye whispered complaints," she declares, her voice echoing off the walls. "Insubordination chills the soul. Let it chill the body." One by one, the girls are doused, the water turning to ice in the frigid air, their skin blistering as hypothermia sets in. One begs, "My lady, we meant no harm, forgive us." But forgiveness is absent. Instead, they are left to shiver through the night, their moans fading as dawn breaks, bodies rigid in death's embrace. Other accounts speak of biting. Elizabeth, in fits of rage or ecstasy, sinking her teeth into cheeks, arms, even breasts, drawing scarlet that she would lick away with deliberate slowness. Irons heated to branding temperatures marked flesh with her initials, a permanent claim on her victims. And then there were the baths, not of water, but of torment. Girls submerged in scalding liquids until skin peeled away, or frozen in ice until limbs blackened. Historical context amplifies the dread. In 17th century Hungary, corporal punishment was commonplace, but Elizabeth's methods bore the stamp of experimentation, as if she viewed her servants as subjects in a macabre laboratory. Analogies to the era's witch hunts abound, tortures mirroring those inflicted on accused sorceresses. Yet here the inquisitor was no noblewoman, but a noblewoman cloaked in privilege. The death toll mounted, bodies disposed in shallow graves or rivers, their absence explained as runaways or plague victims. Peasants knew better, locking daughters away, but poverty often forced compliance, sending more lambs to the slaughter. And then came the legend of Scarlet, a motif that would immortalize her as the Blood Countess, blending fact with folklore in a crimson haze. though modern scholars debate its origins, suggesting it may have been amplified post-trial by political foes or sensationalist chroniclers. Some trace its root to a single pivotal incident around 1606, preserved in the oral histories and trial records as a turning point from punishment to ritual. It began innocently enough, or as innocently as anything in her world could. A maid, nervous and clumsy while combing Elizabeth's hair in her private chambers, tugged too harshly on a knot. The Countess, her vanity pricked as sharply as her scalp, whirled and struck the girl across the face with a jewelled brush. Scarlet spattered, warm droplets landing on her hand and cheek. Wiping it away, she glanced into her ornate mirror, the glass imported from Venice, and paused. Whether delusion, epilepsy-induced hallucination, or mere fancy, she perceived a change. The skin where the scarlet touched seemed smoother, more vital, glowing with an unnatural youthfulness. From that moment, obsession took root. No longer content with mere torment, Elizabeth began to harvest scarlet deliberately, viewing it as an elixir against time's ravages. Girls were sliced with razors, their veins opened over basins or directly onto her skin as she bathed in the warm cascade. Testimonies describe chambers equipped with iron cages suspended from ceilings, victims pricked repeatedly to drip below where Elizabeth reclined. Davia, her herbal lore, concocted potions mixing scarlet with herbs, promising eternal beauty. Was this rooted in contemporary folklore, tales of vampires murmured in Transylvanian villages, or alchemical beliefs in vital essences? Or was it a manifestation of her psyche, vanity intertwining with sadism until scarlet became the currency of both power and preservation? The castle transformed into an abattoir, screams a constant undercurrent, the stone walls absorbing the essence of suffering like sponges. As the years progressed, the victims evolved, marking Elizabeth's gravest miscalculation. Initially drawn from peasant stock, anonymous girls whose disappearances stirred only local murmurs, she began targeting daughters of lesser nobility, lured with promises of courtly education or advantageous marriages. These were not serfs, but young women of rank, their families connected to the web of Hungarian aristocracy. Vanity drove this shift, believing noble scarlet purer, more potent for her rituals. But it cracked her shield of impunity. Noble families, unlike peasants, had voices that carried to Budapest and Vienna. Letters of alarm circulated. "My daughter entered Cheta for service and has not written since. Murmurs of foul play reach us, girls vanishing without trace." The social order, once her protector, began to fracture, rumors swelling into a storm that even her exalted name could not quell. By 1609, the murmurs had reached the ears of King Matthias II, Holy Roman Emperor and ruler of Hungary, whose court buzzed with tales of the widow's excesses. Political undercurrents fueled the scrutiny. The Báthory family's Protestant leanings clashed with Habsburg Catholicism, and her vast wealth tempted those eager for confiscation. Count György Thurzo, Palatine of Hungary and a distant relative by marriage, was tasked with investigation. A man of ambition, his loyalty to the crown outweighing familial ties. Rumors prepared him. Reports from escaped servants, petitions from bereaved families, even anonymous letters detailing the horrors. The net tightened slowly, deliberately, as if approaching a wild beast. Before we delve further, linger on this enigma. Was Elizabeth ensnared by her own delusions, a prisoner of vanity spiraling into ritual madness? Or was the scarlet merely a symbol, masking an insatiable lust for dominion, for extinguishing life at her whim? Evil seldom offers clear motives. It thrives in the blur, where explanation dissolves into gloom. What chills you more, the rituals themselves or the silence that enabled them? Hit like if the darkness grips you, and comment below with your take. Subscribe for the unraveling of her fate. But on a freezing Christmas Eve in 1610, the castle gates would shatter open, unleashing truths that would freeze history itself. What Thurzo's men discovered would transform screams into eternal legend, sealing the Blood Countess's doom. On a freezing winter night in late December 1610, as snow whipped through the Carpathian valleys like vengeful spirits, Count Georgy Thurzo's men descended upon Chaite Castle. Chaite echoed in their orders. It was December 29, the eve of the new year looming like a judgment day, though legends would later shroud it in the glow of Christmas Eve to heighten the irony. A holy night profaned by unholy discoveries. Thurzo, Georgy Thurzo, Palatine of Hungary, and a man whose ambitions intertwined with royal favor, had gathered his force under cover of darkness, armed not just with swords, but with warrants from King Matthias II. The rumors had swollen to a crescendo. Petitions from noble families, escaped servants' tales carried on trembling lips, anonymous missives detailing chambers of torment. Yet, as the castle's silhouette rose against the moonlit sky, its towers' jagged teeth gnawing at the heavens, nothing could prepare them for the abyss within. The gates, iron-forged and unyielding, groaned open under the assault. Thurzo's soldiers bursting through with torches held high, their flames sputtering in the biting wind. The air inside was thick, stagnant, laced with the coppery tang of scarlet and the fetid rot of decay. Footsteps echoed through the halls, muffled by tapestries that hid stains no scrubbing could erase. Murmurs among the men, crosses clutched, prayers uttered, betrayed their dread. They fanned out, searching chambers and cellars. Gasps punctured the silence. In the dungeons below, chained girls, some barely alive, their bodies a canvas of lacerations, bruises blooming like dark flowers, stared with hollow eyes. One, a nobleman's daughter, lured months prior, whimpered as rescuers approached, her voice a rasp. She drinks our youth. Corpses stacked in corners, limbs twisted in final agony. Scarlet pooled in congealed lakes, reflecting torchlight like accusatory mirrors. But the most chilling revelation awaited in the upper halls, preserved in Thurzo's own report as a scene etched in nightmare. Flash back to that fateful evening, Elizabeth Báthory sits at a grand oak table in her private dining chamber, the remnants of a feast spread before her, roasted meats cooling, goblets of wine untouched. Candlelight flickers, casting her face in warm hues that belie the coldness within. She is composed, her gown immaculate, as if presiding over a courtly gathering rather than a den of death. A soft hum escapes her lips, perhaps a lullaby from childhood, twisted now into something sinister. Adjoining the room, through a half-open door, lies the body of a young girl, freshly slain, her throat slit with precision, scarlet still trickling onto the flagstones in rhythmic drips. Elizabeth glances toward it occasionally, her expression serene, as if the corpse were merely a discarded garment. Thurzo's men storm in, swords drawn, their leader's voice booming. Countess Báthory, by order of the king, you are under arrest for crimes against God and man. She rises slowly, unperturbed, her eyes meeting Thurzo's with a gaze that chills him to the marrow. Not defiance, but amusement, as if this interruption were a minor inconvenience. Gentlemen, she intones, her voice silk over steel. Ye intrude upon my solitude. What tales have brought you here? The men falter, crossing themselves, as the adjoining door creaks wider, revealing the horror. Gasps ripple. One soldier retches into the gloom. Elizabeth's calm amid the chaos, her hands unstained, yet the air heavy with complicity, frees history in that moment. Was it arrogance born of nobility, or the detachment of one who had long since crossed into madness? The raid, swift and irrevocable, marked the end of her reign, but the truths unearthed would echo far beyond those walls. Elizabeth was seized and placed under immediate house arrest, confined to her chambers while her accomplices were dragged into the night for interrogation. The castle, once her fortress of impunity, became a prison of sorts, guards posted at every turn. Thurzo, ever the pragmatist, knew the political tightrope. Her noble blood shielded her from common justice, but the evidence demanded action. The trial commenced in January 1611 at Bicza, a hurried affair shrouded in the winter gloom, where over 300 witnesses, servants, villagers, bereaved families poured forth their accounts like a dam bursting. Her confidants, Anna Darvolja, having died mysteriously before capture, some murmured, poisoned to silence her, faced the rack and hot irons no longer. Confessions extracted under duress, yet they aligned in eerie consistency. Ilona Yo broke first. Thumbscrews tightened. Screams echoed. The Countess ordered it all, she gasped. Words spilled. Hundreds of girls tortured for her pleasure, their scarlet collected in basins for her baths. Dorothea Sentesh held defiant. Flames licked her feet, then broke. We held them down as she bit and burned, starved them to weakness, revived to prolong. Katarina Beniczka wept, needles under nails, irons on flesh. My lady watched, smiling. Testimonies painted atrocities, girls from hovels and noble homes, lured, tormented, discarded. 80 confirmed by graves, legends inflating to 650, each name a ghost. Debate rage on reliability. Torture forged lies as easily as truths. Yet accounts dovetailed, methods consistent, timelines overlapped, kernels of horror amid exaggeration. Political motives lurked. King Matthias owed debts to her estate. Protestant faith clashed with Habsburg Catholicism. Trial, justice, or seizure. Thurso benefited from confiscated properties. Elizabeth never stood publicly. Status forbade it. Submitted denial, claimed slander by foes. Court unmoved, sentenced accomplices swiftly. Yo and Sentes burned in the square. Pyres lit, crowds watched. Flames consumed flesh, a mirror of inflicted torments. Benichka, life imprisonment, days fading in a cell's gloom. For Elizabeth, punishment poetic, horrifying. January 1611, walled into a single chamber, doors bricked, windows sealed, save a slit for food and air. No spectacle, no noose, no fire. Noble blood demanded discretion. But entombment alive, living death in her fortress. Imagine predator caged, walls once echoing screams, now muffling isolation. Chill seeping through stone, dim light taunting, muffled footsteps beyond, constant reminder of lost command. Meals slid through, bread, water, scraps. No mirrors for vanity, no servants to torment. Epilepsy's fits returned, hallucinations of bloodied girls in the gloom, or remorse creeping, a veil she could not lift. 4 years endured. Health waned, isolation gnawed body and soul. August 21, 1614, God peered through the slit, called her name. No reply. Inside, Báthory lay still on her cot, body cold as stone, death quiet at 54. Some claim final course, others plea for forgiveness, passing anticlimactic, a whisper where screams reigned, corpse interred without fanfare, unmarked to deny legend's growth.